11 days, 22 engineers, $50 million in billed consulting hours, and the most advanced private jet the consortium had ever certified sat cold and dead on the hangar floor, like a machine that had simply decided it was done. Every diagnostic cart in the region had been rolled through those doors. Every specialist, every contracted systems analyst, every senior avionics technician with initials after their name had pressed their instruments against this aircraft and come back with the same answer. They did not know. Some had said it quietly. A few had said it twice. Desmond Ashford stood where the tarmac met the flight line that morning and looked at the list his assistant had handed him. The names above the last one had all been crossed off in red. He looked at the last name. Then his eyes moved to the jet. "You cannot be serious," he said. Nobody argued with him. They called the number anyway. The call came at 7:14 in the morning, while Shane was pressing the lid onto Nora's lunch container, a yellow one, her choice, with a sticker of a cloud she had put there herself and would be upset to find missing. He set the container down and picked up the phone. Scott's voice was already apologetic before the first sentence finished. 11 days, he said. 22 engineers. The number they kept arriving at every time was his. Shane said he would come. He set the phone on the counter and stood there for the 3 seconds it took Nora to appear in the kitchen doorway, her backpack already on, one sock higher than the other. She looked at his collar the way she always did, that brief downward glance, then her 2 fingers finding the frayed edge of his cuff and pressing it flat with a deliberateness that was entirely her own. He reached up without thinking and tucked Mara's ring back under the collar, the chain cold against his sternum until it wasn't. Nora watched him do it, the way she always watched, and said nothing. There was nothing to say. The ritual had its own language, built over 4 years of mornings, and they both knew every word of it. He dropped her at school at 7:42. She walked to the door without looking back, which meant she was fine, which was the only thing he ever really needed to know. He drove to the facility without hurrying. The regional aviation complex sat where the flatland turned pale gray in November, the kind of sky that offered no particular opinion. The hangar doors were already open when he arrived, spilling white light onto the apron. He parked toward the far end of the lot, where there was room to leave without trouble, and pulled his work bag from the passenger seat. Canvas, worn at the corners. He walked toward the light. Inside, the jet occupied the center of the floor, the way a problem occupies a room, filling it, drawing every eye, radiating the particular authority of a machine that has decided not to cooperate. The overhead lights were harsh and direct. Diagnostic carts stood in a loose semicircle, their screens still running queries that were still producing the wrong answers. There were 4 people in technical gear, 2 in business attire, and 1 man in a dark jacket standing near the nose who tracked Shane's arrival with a look that measured and found insufficient, all in the span of a single breath. Shane did not look at any of them first. He set his bag down by the entrance and looked at the jet. Not the way the engineers had been looking at it, moving, searching, crouching to read instrument output. He looked at it the way you look at something you already understand, when the question is not what the thing is, but what it is doing that it shouldn't. His eyes moved left to right across the instrument panel from where he stood, 12 feet back, too far to read anything, close enough to see the display layout, the illumination pattern, the specific combination of active fault indicators that, to anyone else in the room, was a cluster of downstream symptoms to be chased. To him, it was a signature. His lips moved, barely, counting something private. His weight settled into his heels. Scott crossed the floor and extended a hand. Shane shook it without breaking his count. 11 days, Scott said quietly. Shane nodded. He finished counting. He exhaled once through the nose. Then he reached up, pressed the ring through the fabric of his collar with the flat of his hand, not gripping it, just confirming it was there, and picked up his bag. "Show me the access log," he said. Not a question, just the next thing. To understand what Shane Ellington was doing in that hangar, the story has to start further back than the access log. Further than the 11 days of failure. Further than the $50 million. It has to start at a drafting table in a shared office on the 4th floor of a building that no longer exists under that name, where a 26-year-old systems engineer was writing fault sequencing logic for an aircraft control architecture that no one believed would ever fully work. He believed it would work. He wrote every line of it as though someone's life depended on the sequence being correct. Because in aviation, it always does. The consortium gave him 12 years. He gave them everything that wasn't already Mara's. She was a trade school librarian, which people always found surprising when they learned what he did for a living, as though careful hands and a love of cataloged knowledge couldn't possibly live in the same house. They lived easily in the same house. She organized his reference manuals the same way she organized her shelves, by what would be needed and when. She left margin notes in his specification drafts, small corrections mostly, sometimes just a question mark beside something he'd overcomplicated. He never removed them. When her diagnosis came, he took 3 months of medical leave and never once opened a work file. The consortium sent flowers. Then, 18 months later, after Mara was gone and Nora was 4 years old, and the world had a new and terrible shape to it, the consortium sent a restructuring notice. His division eliminated. His work absorbed and reassigned. His name removed from the documentation and replaced with the names of a team that had inherited his architecture without understanding why any of it was built the way it was. He did not fight it. He was too tired to fight it. He had a 4-year-old who still climbed into bed on his side at 3 a.m, and a ring he'd taken from Mara's hand at the end, and a trade that still lived in him even if the title didn't. He started a small maintenance business. Small work, careful work. The kind of work where a man who understands systems at their source level can hear a fault before it surfaces. Word got around, the way it does in tight-knit aviation circles, quietly and by reputation. He did not advertise. He did not explain himself. He fixed things correctly the first time, and in those circles, that spoke more plainly than any introduction. Nora grew into a girl who noticed small things the way her father did. The frayed collar, the worn cuffs, the ring on the chain that she had seen every morning of her life without ever being told what it meant. She had simply understood it, the way children understand the things that matter most in a house. Every morning, before the school run, she straightened his cuff with 2 fingers. Just 2. A precise, deliberate adjustment that neither of them had planned, and neither of them questioned. He would already have the ring tucked back beneath the collar by then. Her mother returned to the place closest to his chest, and Nora's fingers would find the frayed fabric at his wrist and smooth it flat without looking up. He never said thank you. She never waited for it. What needed to be said had already been understood. That was the architecture holding what remained of their life together. Not words, not titles, not a name on a document somewhere. A ring worn against the sternum, 2 fingers on a worn cuff. A man who built something the world had forgotten he built, raising a girl who saw him clearly every single morning. He drove to the hangar the way he drove everywhere, without hurry, carrying all of it, as he always did, beneath a frayed gray collar held perfectly flat. Desmond Ashford arrived the way men like him always arrived, ahead of schedule so that everyone else would feel late. His car was black. His coat was charcoal wool, collar up against the morning cold, cut in the particular way that costs more than most people's monthly rent. He had the facility director at his left elbow and a subordinate at his right, and he walked through the hangar's side entrance with the measured pace of a man doing a property inspection. The jet occupied the center of the floor like a patient that had stopped breathing. 11 days of diagnostic equipment ringed it. Carts, cables, screens scrolling amber and green. And the engineers who remained looked up when Ashford entered, not because they were happy to see him, but because they had learned by now to track his moods the way sailors track weather. Ashford moved along the aircraft's left flank without touching it. He surveyed the instrument feeds. He said nothing for nearly a minute, which was, for a man like him, its own form of commentary. Then he saw Shane. The gray shirt was not hard to spot in a room of technical vests and branded jackets. Shane was standing at an open access panel near the jet's forward avionics bay, the one the diagnostic tree had never flagged as consequential. He was not consulting a screen. He was not running a cable or attaching a probe. He was reading the panel's interior the way a person reads a page they have read before, not searching, just confirming. Ashford crossed the floor in his direction. The facility director made a quiet introductory motion with one hand, the kind of gesture that is meant to frame a person before the conversation starts. Ashford did not wait for the frame. "Who authorized a contractor in here without a diagnostic rig?" His tone was not angry. That was the particular skill of it. He delivered the question the way a building manager notes a scuff on the lobby floor. Not a crisis, just a thing that should not be there. His eyes moved across Shane's worn cuffs, the absence of a company badge, the absence of a laptop or a cart, or any visible equipment that would justify the presence. Shane did not turn around immediately. He finished the count he was running, lips barely moving, eyes tracking left to right across the panel's inner components in a sequence only he knew. And then he turned, with the unhurried weight of a man who is done with one thing before starting another. "Scott Whitmore called me in," he said. "I know who called you," Ashford said. "I'm asking what you brought." Shane looked at him. Not a challenge, not a flinch. The eyes of a man who understood precisely what he was looking at, and had already accounted for it. "My memory," Shane said. Ashford held the silence for exactly 2 seconds. Then the corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, not quite a sneer, but something that lived in the narrow country between those two things. "Right." He turned partially toward the facility director. "Let's not waste the man's time. Get me the contracted team's status report. I want the full liability chain documented before end of day." He walked away. Not dismissively. That would have required registering Shane as significant enough to dismiss. He simply moved on to the next item. The facility director followed. The subordinate followed. And the conversation closed behind them the way a door closes on an empty room. Shane turned back to the panel. His left hand moved to his collar. Not a dramatic gesture, just a quiet, private one. And his thumb pressed the ring flat against his sternum for a moment. Then his hand came back down. He went back to counting. Whatever Desmond Ashford had decided he was, it did not change what he was here to do. Desmond crossed the floor to where Scott Whitmore stood with his arms folded and his face arranged in the neutral expression of a man keeping his mouth shut out of professional obligation rather than genuine neutrality. "Walk me through this again," Desmond said, his voice low enough that it wouldn't carry. "Who called him?" "I did." "Based on what?" Scott reached into the breast pocket of his jacket and produced a single printed page, a work history, sparse and recent, the kind of document that explains the last 3 years of a man's life without explaining the 20 before them. Desmond scanned it in about 4 seconds. His expression didn't change. "There's nothing here," Desmond said. He knows the aircraft. Everyone in this building knows the aircraft. They have been paid, collectively, more than $50 million to know the aircraft, and the aircraft has not moved in 11 days. Desmond handed the page back without looking at it. "What I'm asking you is whether he has credentials that justify putting him on the line. Certifications, a company, a record. Scott took the page. He has something better. I need something I can put in a report. Scott looked across the hangar floor to where Shane was standing. Not walking, not searching, just standing, with the particular economy of a man who has already decided where he's going and sees no reason to rush toward it. Then give me a few hours, Scott said. Desmond looked at Shane once more. The gray shirt, the worn cuffs, the faint chain at his collar, and turned away. That was the whole of his response. Not dismissal so much as cancellation. Shane simply ceased to register. Across the floor, Shane had moved. Not far. He was crouched beside a low access panel on the aft section of the fuselage, his palm laid flat against the aircraft's skin. His eyes not on the panel, but on the space roughly 8 inches to the left of it. The panel itself was the size of a kitchen cabinet door, marked with a stenciled reference number in yellow letters. The cable runs behind it serviced nothing on any active diagnostic tree. Every cart in the hangar had been routed toward the forward electronics bay, which was where the cascading lockout read, where the symptoms lived, and where 22 engineers had been confidently and methodically wrong. A technician, young, with the careful posture of someone still learning when to ask questions and when to simply listen, was nearby, checking a binder of service records. Shane did not raise his voice. Can you open the Bravo 7 panel for me? The technician looked at it. Then, without quite meaning to, he looked across the hangar at Desmond Ashford. The glance lasted less than a second. It was the glance of a man who has learned, through no dramatic lesson, that some requests need silent authorization before they can be acted on. Shane had seen that glance before. He waited. The technician turned back, made a small decision, and reached for his panel key. The panel came open on its hinge with the soft mechanical resistance of a seal that hadn't been broken in a long time. Inside, a cluster of relays, a secondary routing board, and a bundle of wire looms organized with the careful compression of original factory installation. No corrosion, no physical fault, nothing that would catch the eye of a technician looking for something broken. Shane leaned forward, not touching anything yet. His eyes moved through the interior in the same sequence he had used on the instrument panel, left to right, top to bottom, methodical and unhurried. His lips moved, barely. Whatever he was counting again. Then he stopped. His gaze settled on a single component, a relay block about the size of a fist, mounted in the lower left quadrant of the panel, labeled with a part number in small black type. He looked at it for a long time, long enough that the technician shifted his weight. "Is something wrong with it?" the technician asked. "No," Shane said quietly. "It's just not what it says it is." Desmond had been building toward it for the last 90 seconds. That particular pitch of executive impatience that arrives when a man has decided the meeting is over, regardless of whether anyone agrees. He had his phone in one hand and 2 words already forming, and the words were escort and out. And the 2 contracted engineers nearest the door had already read his posture and were drifting that direction. "I think we've indulged this long enough," Desmond said. His voice carried the flat authority of someone who settles rooms for a living. "Scott, if there's nothing documented, nothing verified, no institutional affiliation, we can actually—" Shane reached inside the panel. Not dramatically, not with any announcement. The way a man reaches for a light switch in a room he has lived in for 20 years. The hand going where the hand already knows to go, bypassing the search entirely. His right arm disappeared to the elbow, into the access cavity. His body did not shift. His eyes did not close. He found the relay housing by its edge geometry, ran his thumb across the face of it, counted 2 positions left along the bracket rail, and felt the component that had no business being where it was. It was smaller than its housing suggested. The label on the casing read one thing: Shane's memory, laid down in a conference room a decade ago over a specification document that nobody had read since, said something else entirely. He pressed the reset tab with his thumbnail. One firm, unhurried push. The click was not loud. It was the sound a mechanical latch makes when it seats correctly. A short metallic note, precise and final. The kind of sound that belongs to something small doing exactly what it was designed to do, after a very long time of doing something else. And then, nothing. For approximately 1 second, nothing at all. Then the avionics bay woke up, not with any drama. A sequence of initialization tones, even and low, moved through the jet's forward systems, the way a current finds a cleared path. The primary display flickered once and held. The fuel management logic cycled through its startup handshake. And somewhere, deep in the aircraft's chest, in the sequence Shane had written the parameters for, the electronic control unit completed a self-check it had been trying and failing to complete for 11 days, and cleared it. The ignition sequence engaged on its own authority. The engines turned over. Clean. Even. The turbines climbing through their startup curve without hesitation, without coughing, without the faintest suggestion that they had ever been anything other than ready. Desmond's mouth was still open. The word he had been building toward, the out, was still technically in the air between his lips and the two engineers by the door. But nobody was moving toward the door anymore. Nobody in the hangar was moving at all. Every head had turned the same direction, toward the same man. The one in the faded gray shirt standing beside an open access panel with his right arm still partially extended and his hand just now settling back at his side. Shane stepped back from the panel. 1 step. His expression had not changed. He reached up briefly, his fingers finding the chain at his collar, not pulling it out, just touching the weight of it through the fabric. And then his hand came down, and he waited. The room stayed quiet. 22 engineers, 7 contracted specialists, 3 facility managers, 1 executive with a phone in his hand and a sentence he no longer had any use for. The turbines rose and held, steady and certain, filling the hangar with the low, sustained voice of a machine finally permitted to do what it was built for. Desmond Ashford had not moved. The turbines held their note, not rising, not falling, just there, even and full, the way a well-built thing sounds when every component is finally speaking to every other component in the language they were designed for. Nobody moved. 22 engineers, a facility director, 3 contracted specialists who had billed a combined 900 hours against this aircraft, every one of them facing the man in the faded gray shirt, who had closed the access panel with the same unhurried economy he had opened it, and was now wiping his right hand on the leg of his trousers. Scott Whitmore moved first. He crossed the hangar floor with deliberate steps, not fast, not slow, and stopped between Shane and Desmond Ashford. He was carrying a binder, the kind nobody uses anymore, thick and worn at the spine, tabbed in 7 colors. He opened it to a flagged page and held it at chest height, not offering it, just making it visible. "Mr. Ashford," Scott said. His voice was level, no theater in it. "The electronic control architecture running this aircraft right now, the fault sequencing logic, the lockout recovery tree, the relay specification matrix, was authored by Shane Ellington. These are the original design documents. His name is on every page." Desmond looked at the binder. Scott didn't close it. The restructuring in year 4 of the development program reassigned the technical credits. His division was absorbed. The records were consolidated under the consortium's name. A pause. But the logic is his, verbatim, every line. In the time it took Scott to say that, 3 things happened in Desmond Ashford's face. Not dramatically, Not the way a man collapses in a film. The way a man's certainties rearrange themselves quietly behind his eyes when the ground has already shifted and he is only now being informed. His chin lifted slightly. His jaw moved once and stopped. His gaze left the binder and found Shane across 6 meters of hangar floor. Shane was not watching him. He was listening to the turbines the way a man listens to something he has not heard in a very long time. Not analyzing, just receiving it. His left hand had come up to his sternum. His fingers closed around the outline of the ring under his shirt. Not tugging, not clutching, just holding. The technician nearest the diagnostic cart turned away from his screen. He had not been looking at his screen for some time. None of them had. The facility director, a woman with short gray hair and the specific posture of someone who has managed serious things for a long time, stepped forward. She looked at the binder. She looked at the open panel Shane had closed. She looked at the readout on the nearest cart, where every diagnostic indicator had resolved to green in the time it takes a relay to reset. She said nothing, but she wrote something in the notepad she carried, and the sound of the pen moving was the loudest thing in the hangar besides the turbines. Desmond Ashford finally spoke. It came out measured and controlled, the way a man speaks when he is spending composure he is not sure he has enough of. "You were the lead designer," he said. Not a question. The words were directed at Shane's back. Shane turned. His expression had not changed since he arrived. The same economy, the same quiet weight behind the eyes. "Systems," Shane said. "I wrote the systems." And then he looked back at the panel, because the turbines were still running, and they deserved someone's full attention. Desmond did not answer. His gaze dropped to the binder still open in Scott's hands and stayed there, and it was a long moment before he remembered to close his mouth. The facility director was a careful man. His name was stenciled on the door of the corner office, and he had held his position long enough to know the difference between a lucky fix and a real one. He crossed the hangar floor with Scott at his shoulder, and when he stopped in front of Shane, he did not offer a hand. Not yet. He looked at the open access panel, then at Shane. "Walk me through it," he said. Shane pulled his hand from the panel. No gesture toward the binder, no preamble. "The relay in position 7 of that secondary bus cluster carries the part number stenciled on its housing," he said. "That number belongs to a switching component, rated for a maximum load draw of 14 amps. What's actually installed in that position is a control relay from a different production family, original designation CR-447-9, rated at 9. It was flagged in the original design specification as a single point of failure if mislabeled. The flag is in Section 8 of the architecture document, page 41. The director had not blinked. That relay was substituted during final production assembly. Cost-cutting measure. Someone reassigned the part number to match the housing and closed the discrepancy report. The relay itself functions within normal operating parameters under standard load, so it never tripped a fault code. What it does under a cascade initialization is draw 3 amps above its rated tolerance for approximately 6 seconds during the boot sequence. Shane's voice did not rise. 6 seconds. The electronic control unit interprets that draw as a fault state it was never given the vocabulary to name, so it locks the sequence and waits. Every instrument downstream reads the lockout condition and generates fault codes consistent with a dozen different possible causes. Every one of those codes is accurate. They are not wrong. They are just answering the question the lockout created, not the question that created the lockout. He gave that a breath. 22 engineers chased 22 legitimate symptoms. None of them were incompetent. The diagnostic tree does not reference that panel because the panel was not part of the certified configuration schematic. It was added in a late-stage production revision after my division had already delivered the architecture documentation. The relay sitting in it was never supposed to be a CR447-9, and no one who came into this hangar after that revision had any reason to know it once was. The director turned to Scott. Scott opened the binder to a tabbed page, a specification sheet, aged at the edges, the kind that survives corporate restructuring in someone's personal files because one engineer thought it might matter someday. Page 41. The flag was there, written in the same dry, technical language Shane had been using in the last 2 minutes, because he had written both. "The Section 8 flag," the director said quietly. "Yes." He turned back to Shane. "You didn't have the binder." "No." "You knew the page number." "Yes." The director looked at the relay, at the open panel, at the running turbines which were cycling through their warm-up sequence with the quiet authority of a machine that had simply been waiting for someone to ask the right question. Shane let him look. He did not press. He did not explain anything further. He stood with his weight easy on his heels and his left hand hanging loose at his side, the slight outline of the ring on its chain just visible beneath the worn fabric at his collar. The director made a note in the small ledger he kept in his breast pocket. He wrote something, considered it, then underlined it once. He looked up. "All right," he said. "I understand." He extended his hand, and this time he meant it. Desmond's assistant produced the contract within the hour. 3 pages, clean typeface, a retainer figure at the top that Shane looked at once and did not look at again. He read the full thing, every clause. He held the pages the way he handled service manuals, unhurried, no performance of urgency, while Desmond stood near the aircraft and the remaining technicians pretended not to watch. The hangar was quieter now. The engines had been shut down for inspection, but the quality of the silence had changed entirely. It was no longer the silence of a broken machine. It was the silence of one that worked. Shane set the contract on the nearest cart and picked up a pen. He did not sign it. He wrote 3 lines at the bottom, below the final clause, in handwriting that was plain and even and unhurried. Then he slid it back across the cart to Desmond's assistant without a word. Desmond read the notation. His expression shifted, not displeasure exactly, something more complicated than that. The 3 lines redirected the full offered fee to a technical scholarship fund to be established, administered, and permanently attributed to the name Mara Ellington. "You want no part of the retainer," Desmond said. "I want the fund established before the end of the quarter," Shane said, "and the attribution in the founding documents, her full name." Desmond looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. Not a performance, not a concession managed for the room, just a nod. "Done," he said. Scott caught Shane near the side door as he was pulling on his jacket. The facility was winding down for the evening. Carts being wheeled back, access panels being secured, the ordinary machinery of the place reasserting itself over the extraordinary thing that had happened inside it. "They're going to file the corrected design records," Scott said. "Your name goes back on the control architecture. The director's already authorized it." Shane zipped his jacket. "I heard." Scott studied him. He had known Shane long enough to understand that the absence of reaction was not indifference. He asked the question anyway because he needed to hear the answer. "Why didn't you fight for it? When they restructured, when they reassigned the work, you could have." Shane's left hand moved to his collar. Not a dramatic gesture. The weight of the chain had been there all day, and his hand found it the way it always did, the way a compass finds north without deciding to. His fingers closed around the ring. "Mara used to sit with me when I was working late," he said. "She'd bring coffee she knew I wouldn't drink while it was hot, and she'd read, and she wouldn't talk. She understood that what I was doing mattered, not because she knew the systems, she didn't, but because she could see that I did." He paused. The hand around the ring didn't move. When they restructured and reassigned everything, she was already sick. She knew what I'd built, every piece of it. She'd sat with me through all of it. He looked at Scott. His voice didn't change in register or weight. It stayed level. She already knew what I built. That was enough. Scott didn't say anything. There was nothing useful to say. Shane pushed open the side door. The evening outside was gray and cool, the kind of gray that softens everything. The parking lot, the distant fence line, the plain, reliable shape of his truck near the back row where he'd left it. He drove directly to Nora's school. He was 4 minutes early. He sat with the engine idling and watched the doors the way he always did. When she came through them, backpack too big for her, jacket unzipped despite the cold, he leaned over and pushed open the passenger door. She climbed in, settled her backpack between her feet, and with 2 fingers straightened the frayed cuff of his sleeve. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. Desmond's letter arrived on a Thursday. Shane set it on the kitchen table beside his coffee and did not open it until Nora had eaten her toast and gone to brush her teeth. When he finally unfolded it, he read it once, slowly, then folded it along the same creases and left it there. He never mentioned it to Nora. What he did do on a quiet Saturday 3 weeks later was drive her to the facility and walk her across the hangar floor. The jet sat under the same white overhead lights, but the diagnostic carts were gone. The air smelled of hydraulic fluid and order restored. He opened the access panel himself, the one no diagnostic tree had ever named. And there, mounted to the interior frame on a small strip of brushed brass, were the words Scott Whitmore had placed there after the records were formally corrected. Control Architecture, S. Ellington. Nora leaned in close. She raised one finger and traced the letters, each one left to right, unhurried, the same way her father moved his eyes across an instrument panel. She didn't say anything. She already knew.